When you drive the most dependable mass-market brand, you can stop thinking about what you can't do and start doing what you never thought possible. Visit your local Kia dealer today to see yourself behind the wheel of the #1 most dependable mass-market brand 3 years in a row by J.D. Power. Kia, movement that inspires.
Call 800-334-KIA for details. Always drive safely. Kia received the fewest reported problems among mass market brands in the J.D. Power 2021 to 2023 U.S. Vehicle Dependability Studies. 2023 study based on 2020 models. See jdpower.com/awards for 2023 details.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Final Four is Not on the Schedule. I'm your host Eric, alongside with expert analyst Rod. Thanks for joining us on the best MSU basketball podcast featuring in-depth recruiting, game matchup, and post-game analysis. We dive deep to give you the best tools to enjoy the Spartans and impress your friends and family. Hey everybody, this is Eric alongside Rod. We're here to discuss another summertime discussion on Moneyball, and I attended it earlier last week, and so we just want to go over how Michigan State's players are looking, and then the, evaluation of what Moneyball really means. We'll kind of get into that a little bit. But before we begin, I wanted to mention and thank a couple new supporters of the show. Robert Barmack, who gave us a very generous one-time payment via PayPal.
Wow.
Thank you so much.
Wow. Anyway.
Yeah. You might know him.
Thanks,
Robert
McCartney. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and then Robert McCartney, who joined us as a patron at the Scott Skiles level. Thank you so much for your support, and for all of you who support the show. Makes a tremendous difference in producing the show, being able to do this extra content, actually going to grow the show. And not only does your financial support help us with that, but also the fact that you guys leave reviews on your podcast player and share the show with your friends. That also grows the show a ton and makes it a big difference in growing our Spartan community. I would like to remind you that there are availability for more gift cards from Nudge Printing if you are interested in leaving a review on your podcast player, a written review. So if you leave one, take a screenshot and then send it along to me at eric@tffinots.com, and then I can get you your $5 gift card to Nudge Printing, which you can also then convert into a larger order from Nudge Printing with a 20% discount by typing Final Four into the coupon code at checkout. All right, so I went to Moneyball with my son this summer. It was the only opportunity I had because it's Tuesday, Thursday, and just the way my schedule is, and it's summer. And so I guess it was really cool because we were sitting down there for the first game, and I turned to my son, I said, I think that's Travis Trice, and he's, it's funny because what Travis Trice was, 2015, that was 7 years ago, and my son is not quite 17, and so he kind of vaguely remembered Travis Trice, and he looks different now. He's got longer hair and stuff, and he looks older. and so he doesn't really remember him that great. And it's funny because to me, it doesn't seem like it was that long ago that Travis was playing. I mean, it's Tim Bagrakis. I don't expect him to know Tim Bagrakis, but Travis Trice, you're like, oh. And I would say what was really cool, and this is probably just the Moneyball experience, is that lots of little kids are running around on the court between games and playing and stuff. And there's this one little kid, he could have been more than 5, and he was dribbling 2 balls at the same time, and he'd go up and he'd shoot and, swish. Now he's tiny, and he's not shooting from more than 6 feet away. But he's hitting 6 foot shots, 5 foot shots, and dribbling pretty well for a kid dribbling great for a kid his age. And I thought, man, I wonder if he's related to one of those players. And then I saw later reported that was Travis Trice's son.
There you go.
Which I didn't surprise me. He's a pretty good little ball handler and good shooter. So I think the first thing I'd say about the Moneyball with Travis Trice, he played on a team that was supposed to have Xavier Booker. Xavier Booker was not there, so he was the one player in Moneyball for Michigan State who was not present on the time we watched. So we can't comment on how he's looking, at least personally. Travis Trice looked really great. I mean, the first 3 or 4 possessions he just pulled up for threes and hit them, and he looked like a pro out there. Go figure. And the only thing my son said is he did remember the fact that Travis, when he used to shoot threes, shot, I don't know what you call it, but was it a knuckleball or like a ball with almost no rotation, when he would shoot those threes. And now it looks like a regular 3-point shot. It looks like a regular shot with the spin on the ball and stuff. So I don't know, we wanted to talk about Travis briefly before we go into the rest of the players.
Yeah, I mean, I know he my understanding was he played well, and he was going up against AJ Hogard, right? Yeah, so that was a really good test, I would imagine, for AJ.
And so yeah, so I guess I'll talk about briefly players who've been there before. So I think I saw, like I said, everyone played but Xavier Booker. AJ Hogard was there, and then Jaden Akins, and the other one would be Walker. Those are the players I thought were sort of separate from the rest of the team that was playing, in the sense that they looked, I don't say disinterested, but they're like playing really hard. I guess it's especially AJ and Akins. They just kind of seemed like they were just present, and occasionally they would do some things. And so I don't know. I guess I don't go to a lot of AAU games. Like I could say, I never go to them, and so maybe the level of defense is even less than an AAU game.
Yeah, I would say it's less than an AAU. Yeah.
So it was kind of not very interesting in some respects. It wasn't a regular game.
I'll frame it this way, and then you can respond. The problem in AAU, I would say, often is not willingness. It's two things. It's one, that these teams don't practice with each other ever. So there's really no such thing as team defensive concepts. Like you don't,
Right.
help rules, those types of things, keeping gap coverage in line, all of that stuff. It doesn't happen. So that's one of the reasons why there are defensive problems occasionally in AAU. And then also you're talking about younger players in many instances where it just hasn't been emphasized yet for them in their up to that point in their careers. At the first time they're really going to get somebody actually digging into them to teach how to play defense is going to be when they hit college, because it stands to reason for most anybody who's ever played. You just mentioned watching a 5-year-old. What's the 5-year-old doing? The 5-year-old is not doing defensive drills where they're trying to stay in front of their man. They're shooting, right? And so most everybody grows up with offense being the first thing that you care about, the first thing that comes, and the first thing that you want to do. And so those are the reasons why it doesn't show up in AAU. I get the sense, and you can tell us if this corresponds with what you saw, that in Moneyball, at least from the MSU players, sometimes it's as simple as I don't want to get hurt.
Yeah, right.
So they just and there's
right.
just not. But I want to say this, and it applies to everybody you're going to talk about. You have to remember, when those guys show up at Moneyball, they haven't been lounging around all day before that.
Right.
They've gone through, they may have practiced already. They probably have. They've also, in many instances, gone through weight training sessions that day, et cetera. So they've already had a full day under their belts by the time they get to Moneyball. That has something to do with it too, in terms of effort level. And then the other thing is the guys you're talking about, you just mentioned the 3 starting guards. These guys don't have anything to prove.
Yeah, and I would say, and that was the difference. It was a striking difference watching Jaden Akins last Moneyball last year versus this year.
Yeah.
Last year he was definitely trying to exert himself. I mean, trying to show sort of what his new skill set is, probably working on all the things, and he just, from an athletic standpoint, he was head and shoulders above everyone else on the floor, and it looked like it. Like he would go and attack the rim, and he would shoot a lot more. He was just much more passive in this game. And to your point, maybe he's just avoiding injury. Maybe he was tired and just didn't really care. I mean, he played and he made some plays occasionally, even on defense. But for the most part, he was just kind of present.
Right.
And I don't think he probably felt like he had, again, much to prove. And so he would occasionally shoot, and he looked good. He looked like Jaden last year. So I would say that he didn't look any different. From a physical standpoint, he looked pretty much the same. He moved great. I mean, so that's encouraging. He didn't look like he had any sort of limitations. Not that he looked like that at the end of last season, but nothing seems to have changed from the end of last season. And it's funny in these games. I think the way they work it is that the players, there's no coach, right? So I think the players decide when they go.
They used to have coaches.
Come out
they
off
don't
and
have coaches anymore.
I don't think
Because I
so. I
know
mean,
I
if
know a guy who used to coach. I know a guy.
oh yeah,
Yeah, I know a guy. This goes back a while, but I know a guy who coached Matt McQuaid's team heading into his freshman year. Um, and I got an early tip as to the confidence that Matt McQuaid played with. Some might call it cockiness at that point, but yeah, they used to have coaches, but I mean, in name only. So I guess it makes sense that they've dispensed with that charade.
yeah. I mean, as far as I could tell, it looked like the players just substituted
Right.
themselves often on the court, and then pretty much the Michigan State players kind of decided when they want to come off. I think that. I mean, I think look, it's mainly a Michigan State run league, and that you have a bunch of other players, and so it's a way for the players to get some experience and to show off for the fans, I suppose, and stuff. So there were. I think AJ played. I think the entire game. I don't know that he came out, and he looked fine. He just took lots and lots and lots of plays off, where he never came back across full court or half court
I think
line.
the biggest
So
the biggest thing I'm curious, and I don't worry about this with Tyson or with Jaden because they don't have problems, but um, how did AJ look from a conditioning standpoint? I mean, did he look in shape? Did he look
oh yeah,
okay? That's
for
well, there
sure.
you go. That's
Yeah,
really
he looked great.
honestly, that's the biggest thing I take away from these games is that how
Yeah,
do they look physically?
I think Tyson looked exactly the same, and he looked
Yeah,
exactly the same as he did last
that
year.
guy's never going to have a problem with conditioning, and neither will Jaden.
No,
You know,
yeah, and I think yeah, right, and I think the one thing with Walker too is I say he looked. I mean, his game looked identical to last season, so I think he'll be exactly what he was. I mean, from a shooting
yep.
standpoint and from ability to get in lane and his quickness and those sorts of
Yeah,
things. So
the thing about Jaden too that I'm guessing this isn't the environment to see it in. The thing we've spent some time talking about. I think is very likely to be the thing that people notice that's a little different this year is his usage. So I am, from everything I've been told, and things that Jaden has said, by the way, in interviews,
hmm
the little bit of media he's done this summer, he's reiterated this. Um, I am expecting him to play with the ball in his hands more than we saw last year. I'm expecting that responsibility to be shared more between those three starters than we saw. Whereas last year, if you think about it, most of the time you had Jaden spotting up, and it was either AJ or Tyson looking to make a play, and then they'd kick out to Jaden, and he was spotting up on the arc. And that's a good thing for Michigan State strategically. That works, but they know that there's more that there in Jaden's game that's untapped, and he wants to explore that for his own development too. So I do think you saw Michigan State moving toward a little more of that toward the end of the season with some good results. We saw it from Jaden in the tournament on a few more occasions than we had up to that point. But I think it's going to be likely to be even more. And I imagine you didn't see a lot of sophisticated pick and roll stuff being run at
no,
Moneyball.
I was just gonna say there were picks occasionally,
Yeah,
but not a whole lot of
and then what's
them.
the caliber of defense being played on those? Next to none, right? So yeah,
Yeah, it was. There wasn't a whole lot of resistance most of the time and Jade had a number of times when he would dribble into the lane a little bit and then pull up and shoot and looked fine. But again, there's not really much resistance there when he's doing those sorts of
the other
things.
thing probably worth mentioning here is Carson Cooper did an interview. It might have even been with Spartan Mag the other day, and he made a comment that got some people's attention about his own development, which we'll talk about when we turn to him, but
Right.
individually. But he made a comment. There's a reason I'm bringing this up now. He made a comment about his own development, and then he had a line about and fitting into the new offense, and that got people's attention. Like, well, what the hell does that mean? I
Right.
think, and call this an educated guess. Don't think that Tom Izzo has reinvented the wheel, but he's always tweaking every year. This is something that I always find funny about some so-called critics of the program when they talk about Izzo straight jacketing players, and he runs the same
So
stuff every year, you know, set
yeah,
set heavy, all that crap. No, the reality is it evolves year to year. What he asks of his players, and that depends on a lot of things. It depends on the talent he's got. It depends on the experience level, and that's the big thing here.
yeah, right,
Historically, if you look at the way Michigan State operated, say Cassius Winston's junior and senior years, or when Denzel Valentine was a senior, or even in some ways his junior year when Travis Trice was a senior, since you were talking about him. Um,
mm-hmm.
and this has happened with other iterations of Michigan State as well. Generally speaking, when his decision makers are experienced and they've earned more trust, the sets decrease and they move toward more of a situation where the decisions are being put in the hands of the players. So you can call that read, react. It's that type of thing. It tends to be more free flowing, less set dependent. And I suspect that's what Carson Cooper was getting at. And I think we're going to see that because all three of those guys we just mentioned, you're talking about a fourth year senior, a fifth year senior, and a guy in his third year in Jaden. Well, that's a hell
Yeah,
of a lot of experience. And so if history is your guide, expect more read react. It will look more like it did when Cassius was a veteran or when Denzel was a veteran, because that's where these guys are in their progression.
yeah. I think it's a good point, and anyways, watch Izzo over the years. You've seen that years where it's more set heavy, and ones that it's not, and it's always like you said, it's dependent on the point guard and the experience there in that level, and there are some years where you're like, boy, this is really kind of a painful half court offense to have to get into their set,
Go
right?
back,
And that's just because
2020 and 2021
right.
as examples, right? And then last year was the year I think you saw through the course of the season the trust being earned. AJ
Mm-hmm.
Hogard
Yep.
becoming much more trustworthy. Tyson Walker making that second year adjustment to the Big Ten level and becoming a very trustworthy player. That's where they're at now. They've gone through those steps.
I think it's underrated too when you look at that as far that aspect of the offense with Izzo, and just to show you, I guess, how impressive a coach he is that he can adapt and not just run the same thing every year. That he can adjust it to be successful still, consider with the various levels of experience. And so anyway,
It's an instant tell when you see somebody talking about, Izzo's stubborn. He doesn't change his ways. He runs the same sets every year, but it's an instant tell. If you ever see anybody talking that way, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. They're clueless. He has tweaked what they do every single year he's been at Michigan State. They will do some things differently. You will see new plays, even within the sets that they run. You'll see new stuff every year. You see this, as I say, this ever evolving orientation toward how they approach offense, depending upon what he has. It's a constantly shifting, changing, tweaked thing. Yeah, there are principles in mind. There are consistent things that they do from year to year, but the totality of it always changes.
and if you're a longtime fan, I think you may not think about it, but those are definitely things you should notice through the years. Uh, Before we go and talk onto the other players, I think a little more interesting to talk about the ones who've development. I just want to remind everyone to check out Nudge Printing. And I was especially reminded when I was there, I was wearing my shirt, and I was walking along the track, and I'm like, hey, there's a guy wearing our shirt. And so a brief little shout out to Keith as we met up. I posted the picture on Instagram too. Big fan of the show. He's had his Nudge Printing t-shirt on, logoed shirt. And I guess his son listens a lot too. So hello to you too. Thanks so much for coming out and saying hi. I appreciate it. It was kind of fun seeing someone looking like me sort of out there. But if you want to get your own logo shirt, you can head on over to our website at tffinots.com/merchandise. And there you can get either logo t-shirt, so you have it ready for either basketball season or maybe tailgate season, which is football season's only just right around the corner, just a few weeks from now. think the fall practice starts in a week or so, as of this recording, and so we'll see what's going on with the football team this year. But you can head over there, and when you make your order, all the proceeds for the shirt or the hoodie go towards our show. And so it's a great way of supporting the show and also having a chance to wear some really awesome gear. I've got the hoodie and I've got the t-shirt, and they're super soft, comfortable, very wearable. I mean, it's super high quality too. We've washed it a ton of times, and it looks just like it did the first time I wore it. You will not regret the purchase. That or anything else in Nudge Printing. They always use very high quality materials and just higher quality t-shirts. It's something that I never appreciated. I know you've done lots of work with t-shirts with various ventures.
Yes,
I never really paid much attention to it, right?
No, most people do. Most people, as far as they take it, is, oh, I like one that feels softer, or I like one that's heavier, boxy construction. But they do use really high quality stuff, and it sounds like a cliche, but it is God's honest truth. You can literally feel the difference.
Oh, there's no question. Yeah, wearing that t-shirt versus most of my t-shirts, it's night and day. It's like one is like comfortable, and one you're just kind of wearing a t-shirt, right? Like you've got clothing over you, as opposed to something that actually feels.
Yeah, the other thing too is that what I've noticed that I think they're really good at is they're continually, slowly but steadily, what they're offering changes. Like there's always something new, and they're really, really good. And this is something that appeals to me. And once you've been running around on God's green earth for a long enough time, you remember there are things that used to be, visuals, logos, etc., that used to be used in the now distant past that you haven't seen for a while, or maybe ever. It might have even predated when you were on this earth. And I think they do a really good job at bringing some of those back. And so you have a lot of unique looking products on offer there, I think, is what I'm trying to get at. These aren't, and no knock on like Student Bookstore or any of the places around campus, that the International Center, that offer MSU apparel, because that stuff's great too. But what Nudge does is definitely strikes me as very unique. So if you're looking for something that not everybody at your tailgate has, it's a good place to go.
Free shipping for all that stuff too. So you get 20% off if you mention Final Four. Just type it in on the comment for the gift code at the checkout. You can't miss, again, check out Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. All kinds of things there, not only Michigan State, but other schools as well in the state of Michigan, outside of the University of Michigan. So check out their stuff. You won't regret it. So let's talk about the player who stood out the most to me. And this is, I think it was in the second game, and now it's been a few days, so I'm trying to remember. But it was Trey Holloman. He has, I think, physically he looked about the same. I don't think he did look a whole lot different to me. But he played with, and I think, when I talked about this last year, I remember telling you that I thought his shot looked pretty good. And that was one of the questions coming into the last year. Could this guy shoot? And because there were a lot of questions about it. And his shot looked really good. He shot well over 50% from three. He was a lot of confidence. He was able to get in the lane and do pull-up jumpers. He had to have shot like 60 or 70% in the game in general. And that was including long range. And most of it were three-point attempts. And so he looked really good, really confident, very comfortable with the ball in his hand. And I don't know, the Moneyball, I think it goes like this, where every once in a while a guy decides he wants to just get the ball a bunch and score. And I think this was a game that Trey wanted to score a bunch. But he looked really good. And I think it's very easy for us to forget about him. I don't, but my son still thinks always calls him the GOAT. I think partly as a joke, but partly because he really liked the defensive intensity he brought to last season. And I think, Trey recognized, which freshmen don't often recognize maybe at Michigan State as well as they should, early on, that the way to get on the floor, play defense, go after the ball, don't make mistakes in offense, just play your role as far as a point guard, distribute the ball. Don't worry about scoring, that'll come at some point. But to get minutes and to hold on to them as a freshman is to just, play generally mistake-free, play hard defense, go 100 miles an hour the whole time you're out on the floor. And that's what he did. And so I think people said, well, that's, he's doing that because he can't score. And I think his high school career probably suggests otherwise. And certainly Moneyball, yes, it's Moneyball. There's no defense. I get it. But I think people just forgetting him and just saying, well, Jeremy Fears is going to be playing more minutes than him are wrong. I also think that there's probably a decent chance that he's going to be playing with A.J. Hoggard. I don't think that would be impossible to imagine that he'd be sort of the off-ball guard as well on their offense. I mean, I don't know.
Well, we'll speak to that last bit first. Graham Couch did an interview with him, I think, after the game that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about exactly that he's been in practice playing a lot with Jeremy Fears together. And I think that would also go along with A.J. Hoggard. I absolutely think Trey Holloman is going to play off the ball a lot. To me, the obvious thing, we know who the three starters are on the perimeter. And to me, Trey Holloman and Jeremy Fears are the two clear-cut guys who are going to have significant roles off the bench at those spots. Now, whether they expand that to a third guy and how they do that, does that mean Malik Hall is still playing some wing? That's a possibility. Does it mean Garrett Norman is forcing his way firmly into the rotation as a freshman? That remains to be seen. And that's possible because those guys offer something a little bit different physically. They offer size, and you are going to see teams that will have a 6'6", 6'7" wing that Michigan State might find that, that Hoggard and Akins are both capable of guarding bigger players, and they're decently sized themselves. But there's a difference even between those guys and say a Terrence Shannon at Illinois is a good example of a guy who would, if Jaden Akins or A.J. Hoggard is guarding him, they can hang with him. But it's not necessarily ideal. When they're off the floor, what do you do? So anyway, I'm getting a little bit off the subject. Bringing it back to Trey Holloman, I absolutely think he's firmly in this rotation this coming season. I expect him to be better and to take a sophomore jump. And so you say, well, how can he be better? The primary way is exactly what you're talking about. It's in offensive assertiveness for himself. What he did last year was he defended very well early on. I thought when he got into Big Ten play, things hit a little bit of a lull, and I think some of that was probably the caliber of scouting that opponents saw some vulnerabilities they were able to exploit. So then it's up to Trey to adjust and react to that. And I think he did. By the end of the year, he got back on the beam. So we know he can check. We also know that he's capable of handling the ball against pressure. He's capable of initiating the offense. But for us to see the full realm of what he's capable of doing, it's going to take his being more assertive offensively, because when he does that, that will also open up more opportunities for him to be more dynamic as a playmaker, because teams will have to guard him. Defenses have to adjust to what he's doing, and that usually will create more opportunities for others. So it will make Trey, I thought Trey did a very solid job of running offense last year, but he wasn't much of a dynamic creator. And that's just because when you're not a scoring threat, it's hard to be that, right? Yeah. It's the difference between, say, Tum Tum Nairn and Cassius Winston. That's the difference. Cassius Winston was always a threat, so it opened up opportunities for other players and for him to find them. When the defense doesn't worry about you as a scorer, it's a lot harder to do that. But look, I'm firmly on the Trey Holloman bandwagon. I mean, I agree with you. I think he's shown, even last year, his shot looks fine. It didn't always go, but it looks fine. And I don't, if it's me, I look at him and say, you got to keep shooting it. Because even if it's not going today, it's going to go tomorrow. There's no problem fundamentally with his stroke. I'm glad to hear that he had a game where he was hitting like that. I think for guys like, again, we don't take very seriously what happens in Moneyball, but sometimes with guys who are looking to make that kind of jump, the kind we're talking about with Trey, these kind of things help. He does it in front of a crowd, right? So he feels better about himself as a scorer. And that may translate into where we really need to see it, which is when the lights are really on in November and beyond. But I definitely think, and the other thing too, you mentioned about him kind of vis-a-vis fears. That's not the way I think about it, because I think there are minutes for both of those guys. I don't think it's a one or the other, because I don't think that Trey's going to be restricted to playing on the ball.
Right.
So I definitely think we can look for and expect a better Trey Holloman and to see more of Trey Holloman. And I still think his future is very bright.
Yeah, and the one thing I'd like to mention too is, last year Pierre Brooks is sort of the talk of Moneyball a little bit. The guy scoring a lot of points and things like that. I would say the kind of game that that Pierre Brooks had last year was high volume of shots, and I was not super impressed with Pierre Brooks at Moneyball the one time I watched him.
Right.
I mean, he scored quite a bit, but he took a ton of shots, a lot of ill-advised, and he's almost like kind of like still moving while he's shooting threes. And this looked like Trey's game looked more like a game that would translate into a regular offensive approach.
He was more efficient. Yeah.
Yeah, he's more efficient, but also he wasn't just chucking the ball.
That's what I mean. That he was actually taking good shots.
Yeah.
Not just a volume scorer.
Right. But he also had like hand in his face.
Right.
So I mean there was some now it wasn't super tight defense because it was Moneyball. But anyway, I thought his offensive performance was more impressive than Pierre Brooks, even though, I don't know, point-wise, maybe they're the same. I didn't keep track. I know. I think Jim Comparoni's game probably kept track of the actual point totals. But anyway, so that was my impression of Trey. Then, the other returning players, Kohler has definitely trimmed down. He doesn't have that baby face anymore. And so I felt like Cooper, and Sissoko, who all played, none of them played great in the sense that that was super impressed with them, and I almost wonder if they'd all been lifting, like you mentioned, lifting weights or doing have a huge workout before, because none of them played with a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And but Jackson did fine. He's I don't know. I guess there wasn't anything special about the way he played. Cooper's definitely filled out more in the chest. I mean, you can definitely see that. He still moves fine. He looked okay. Mahdi has definitely gotten bigger too, by quite a bit. He's really looks a lot stronger.
Look, I think with all three of those guys, that's it. That's what I take away from it right now, more than anything else, is okay, what physical development have you done? And all three of them, to me, and you were there, so you saw them in the flesh. I'm just reacting to what I've seen in clips. But they all three, to me, to my eye, it is noticeable. Jackson Kohler looks great. Jackson Kohler seems to have gone through, maybe what Joey Hauser went through, where he wasn't in bad shape last year, at least to the eye. But he will tell you, because I've heard him say it, that he thought he was prepared for what it's like to play in the Big Ten and to play at Michigan State from a conditioning standpoint. And he found out that he wasn't, not fully. Well, he knows now. It's interesting you mentioned that they weren't playing very hard. Keep in mind, the week before the July 4th break, Jackson Kohler played a game against Xavier Booker in Moneyball. And again, we don't take too much from this, but the numbers were so absurd, I feel compelled to mention them. I believe I have this right. He had 53 points and 24 rebounds in that game.
Yeah, that's what I heard too.
So he's had games, but I think you're right. I think you can't know, well, what did they do before they got to Moneyball? This is one of the reasons I was mentioning that earlier. Those guys probably all had, I'm going to assume, had a tough workout day. But I will mention something else that caught my attention. Last night, I think it was, Michigan State basketball. And I can't imagine anybody listening to this isn't following the Michigan State basketball accounts on Twitter or Instagram. But if you're not, you should. They had some clips from practice, like actual Michigan State practice. And there was one clip which caught my eye. There's another one I'll mention in a minute, which caught my eye even more. But Jeremy Fears penetrating, and he's at the rim and has drawn the defense to him, makes a great kind of wraparound kick out to Jackson Kohler on the 3-point line, who, looking a lot like Joey Hauser, just rose up, fired, hit it, and then had a big reaction. I do think that it is possible that we will see Jackson Kohler in a little more of an expanded type role offensively, meaning he shot mid-range shots last year to good effect, but he has 3-point shooting ability. There's no question about that. So I think we may see a little bit more of that. But to me, the biggest takeaway is what you mentioned. It's that he looks, and it is noticeable, he looks like he's in great shape. And that's going to help everything that was an issue for him last year. It should mean that he's able to finish plays better offensively. Because you remember, especially early on, he was really struggling to finish inside. Like, he'd make a great move. We know he has great footwork. He has a great sense of balance and how to use his body to create space and angles, all that stuff you need to be a good post player, but he just wouldn't finish plays. Well, that's a conditioning and a strength issue. I think that's going to be addressed. And I think being in better shape is hopefully going to make him much better defensively. And that's obviously where the strides, and he got better during the course of last season, I felt, but he needs to continue to get better.
And I was going to say the other thing about him, he got doubled right away last year, which is very weird for a freshman.
Like, the book was out.
I wonder if he's, I wonder if that he's going to be prepared for that this season.
Yep.
And boy, look at this team, there are shooters all over the place.
Exactly.
They were last year too.
And I think Jackson this is not going to be a Nick Ward situation. Like, right. I think he will find people. The interesting thing too, something else that's been mentioned this summer, and I don't recall whether we've had a chance to talk about it, is, sometimes the players are talking in these, especially around Moneyball, because that's when press gets easy access to them. There's been some talk about Jackson maybe playing the 4. I'm not sure I entirely buy it in this sense. I don't know that I believe that they're ready to have him guarding 4s. Maybe, but offensively, I could see it. So you could have a situation, as we did see sometimes last year, where you have some combination of Jackson and Carson out there together, or Jackson and Mahdi, and it'd be more Jackson and Carson, actually,
Cooper,
where they can switch. So Carson, who's more mobile, more athletic, could play 5 on offense, but guard the 4, and vice versa with Jackson. I believe we could see that potentially, but it's one of the reasons why I brought up that play from practice that Michigan State basketball had the other day. Is it shows you there is some level of seriousness. The context it was talked about was Jackson maybe giving them a little bit of the same type of thing they would get from Joey, obviously not to the same degree as a shooter, but being capable of doing some of that. And that play that I referenced was a Joey Hauser-like play. So it'll be interesting to monitor that. I still think Carson Cooper, and it's no knock on Mahdi and Jackson. I think those guys are going to have their moments too. But the guy who long-term, if I had a gun to my head, I had to put my money on one guy from those 3 that's going to end up the furthest down the line to being a really good player by the time his Michigan State career is done. And I had to choose one. I personally would probably choose Carson Cooper. And we saw it late last year. Defensively, he'd started to earn a lot of trust. He has the physical tools, and he was obviously picking stuff up conceptually, mentally. And I think the offense is going to come, and he's going to be better at both ends as he develops physically. Now, you said it, and I've noticed it, clips I've seen from this summer. He looks to have really filled out in his upper body. And that's where
A lot. It's a
it needed
huge
to
difference.
happen. Yeah, this is MSU's weight training program really coming to the forefront, because he looks noticeably different to my eye. And that's a big part of it with him. I think the two things that needed to happen with Carson Cooper are pretty simple, at least to understand. They're not simple to execute. He had to fill out physically and develop, particularly the upper body. And then he just needs game reps. He just needs experience. Well, the second one is being taken care of as time goes on. And it looks like he's addressed the first one. So I'm very excited to see what he does this season. He also had an interview, I mentioned it, with Spartan Mag the other day, and he talked about feeling much more confident offensively. Now, when you saw him, did you see the sky hook come out? Because I
don't think he had one.
all right, because
I
I've
think
read
it was
that
just mainly dunks.
I've read that he has unveiled that, and it's been a good shot for him. Man, sometimes with a big kid, especially at the college level, if you've got that one go-to post move, that can be enough. You know?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's not the NBA. You don't have to throw 5-6 counters at people. If you've got one especially something like a hook shot, where if you execute it, it really is just about impossible to defend. You know, the only one stopping you on that kind of move is you, if you don't make it, because the defense isn't going to block the shot, you know?
Right.
So it'll be interesting to watch how much offensive development. But again, I don't even think that stuff is all gravy. He also talked in the interview about, being able to shoot out to 15 feet. Okay, I need to see that before I believe it. Not that I don't think he's capable of it, but I know how it goes for Michigan State with big guys. There's a process before you have that green light. And I don't know that I believe that Carson's fully gone through that process yet. But all that stuff's gravy. To me, I saw signs last year, late in the season especially. I think he could be an outstanding pick and roll guy, because I think he sets good picks, and I think he's got decent hands, and his athletic ability is absolutely going to make him a threat. Just setting a screen and then diving to the rim. If you think about the way that Xavier Tillman played, it's that. And Xavier Tillman was an effective offensive player at Michigan State without ever becoming even a really good low post player. He didn't really ever have a great low post game. Michigan State wasn't having him back people down or just throwing it to him on the block and letting him go to work. That's not how Xavier operated. But he was a threat in pick and roll. And I think Carson Cooper can be that pretty soon. Like now, I think he could be capable of it.
Yeah. I think, Cooper definitely has a feel. And you're going to go and talk about Marty. Marty's a guy who does not have great instincts, because I think he just doesn't have the experience playing the game like Carson does.
Yeah. But I will say, too, with him, physically, I mean, to me, looking at him, I've had to do a double take sometimes where there's been clips from practice say, hey, is that Antonio Smith? Because, I mean, really, not that Marty was in bad shape. He was put together to begin with. But it looks to me, and I mean, you saw it live, so you tell me if I'm right, that it's noticeable upper body development.
Oh, yeah. There's no question. I mean, he's gotten bigger. Because I saw him. I went down on the court at the end of the Ohio State game, the last game of the season, and then I was on the court with him on Tuesday, just saying hi or whatever. And he's bigger.
Yeah,
there's no question. He's changed a lot in just a few months.
And with Marty, look, I think that at this stage, I'm not expecting. I'm not expecting Marty to be stepping out to the 3-point line. That's not going to happen.
Nope.
I think he does show that he has the elements of a solid low post game there. It's just been inconsistent. So could he show more consistency there? Sure. I think as Michigan State hopefully gets into transition more, I think his athleticism as a rim runner will show up more. He might be able to contribute a little more there. But for me, it's enough. If we see a version basically similar to last season, just a little more consistent. I'd take that. And again, it's a combination. It's going to be a combination of these three guys. It's not like we're going to see any one of them, I think, just become a 30-minute a night guy. I think they're going to split those minutes. So, I know my mind, I think more about Jackson and Carson because you feel like that ceiling has not been established yet. There's still a lot of questions for how good could they be? With both of them, there are reasons to think, well, they could be a lot better than what we've already seen potentially. With Body, it feels like, and I don't think this is fair to him because I think he's got unrealized potential as well. But your natural inclination, because we've seen him for longer, is okay, well, we kind of know what he is. But even if that's the case, that's enough that he's going to play a role. He's going to be part of this in a significant way. And I'm good with that because I think there are things he brings, especially defensively, especially as a rebounder, that Michigan State absolutely needs.
Yeah, no question. I think those are all good points. And I like the fact that when he finishes, even if he gets fouled, he's pretty reliable on the line.
He got a lot better there.
That's the one
year.
Shot.
Yep. Huge deal for a big kid. Absolutely huge.
For sure. Right. Yeah. Before we go on, I just wanted to remind everyone to, if you feel life's in the gutter, maybe you need to talk to the brothers at Just Two Gutters. Kurt and his team out in West Michigan and Greg and his team on the southeast side of the state will take care of your gutter work, which is, of course, as you have these monsoons that happen, like we had a few days ago, you need to make sure you have good gutter work, and you have to have the right people doing the job. People who put the leaf guards on to make sure you don't have debris that gets in there, so that you have a gutter like I did, where I had actually a tree growing in my gutter. I had gutters that were 3 stories up off my walkout basement, and so there's no way I was getting a ladder. I've seen taking care of too many people who fall off ladders, so I just like to leave that to the professionals. So make sure you contact Kurt and his team. The Brothers Are Just Two Gutters over on the west side of the state. You can find the links to how to contact him below. You get 10% off your job if you mention Final Four. He said he's had some of our listeners who have come on and had some great work, and so we appreciate you guys supporting us by supporting the sponsors of our show that make the show what it is. And you're getting super high quality service. I can speak to you personally. You won't regret it. So if you have any sort of question with the gutters, contact the Brothers at Just Two Gutters. So let's talk about the freshmen who are playing. So I'll begin with Jeremy Fears. I think everyone's talked about how he looks really good. He moves well. He's very athletic. He has no trouble getting up to the rim. He shoots well. I watched just the first half of his game because then I took off because it was a 20-point game at halftime and it was later in the day and my son's like, let's just get out of here. So and Moneyball is not very interesting if you don't have people playing defense and such. So I watched him just the first half. He was, like I said, gets up to the rim fine, shoots well. He seemed frustrated at times, just not getting the ball. But I think that's just a Moneyball thing, and everyone's is trying to do their thing, wherever they're from. So, but a talented kid. He's definitely going to see the court. There's no question. I mean, not there's much question anyway with the McDonald's All-American with his skill set and what we've seen from clips, and he's played in Team USA, but he's good, and he's going to get his time, and he's everything I think we'd hoped. And I always like to remind my friend who's an Illinois fan that they passed on him.
Well, that's what they claim. Yeah. Yeah, that one. And meanwhile, I've been, as Eric knows, I've been working on previews for next year. And yeah, that's one that Illinois, I think this season is going to live to regret. Because boy, are they in trouble at the point guard. Woo!
It's funny. It's guard you. It's guard you. Right?
Guard you. Yeah. No guards on campus. He would have walked. I mean, he would have been the starter and probably a high 20s, maybe even 30-minute a night guy on that team. If that's true, that's how it went, that Illinois kind of made a decision. They didn't think he could shoot well enough. That might go down as one of the all-time recruiting blunders. But yeah, I think, look, the consensus of people I've talked to, both and this is both people like Jim Comparoni that have mentioned this in their writing, and then, some other people I know who know this stuff. Jeremy Fears right now is pretty clearly the most prepared of the freshmen to make an immediate serious impact. I honestly think if we were in a different situation and Michigan State were Illinois, for example, and they had nobody returning at that spot, I would feel pretty good about handing the keys to Jeremy Fears for this season. Now he would have freshman adjustments and a learning curve the same as any freshman does, and we've seen it at Michigan State. Cassius Winston as a freshman was a good player, and you could see vast potential, but he wasn't the championship level guy he became. There is a curve there, but the ideal situation for Jeremy and for Michigan State is he doesn't have to do that. They're going to ask him to play a very particular role, which is to be that relief pitcher. And I think he's extremely well positioned to give Michigan. I think this, if you're going to tell me that there's a better two-man point guard combination in college basketball than AJ Hoggard and Jeremy Fears, I need to see it, because I don't believe there is. You can argue that there may be better point guards than AJ Hoggard nationally. There probably are a handful that you might be inclined to take over him, but not many. But there isn't anybody that combines that level of player with a Jeremy Fears as a reserve. And I think the sky's the limit for him as the totality of what he is. He's going to come in. He's going to be unlike Trey Holloman. I will be surprised if Jeremy Fears has any hesitancy in looking for his own offense. He just strikes me as a kid with the kind of confidence to not have that happen. And so that should make him dynamic, because he's going to force the issue and force defenses to deal with him. And then at the other end, everything I've seen from him up to this point suggests that he will be ready to be an impact guy defensively as well. That's the great thing. If you look at him and Trey Holloman coming off the bench, Michigan State should lose next to nothing defensively. And you're talking about two guys who handle and pass the ball at a high level. The only thing you'd say you're going to see a downgrade in, perhaps, is the shooting, but that remains to be seen as well. Jeremy Fears, one of the knocks on him is a shooter. You mentioned Illinois. Supposedly, the story was the reason they didn't take his commitment is they had questions about him as a shooter. I've seen Jeremy Fears play a lot the last 2 years. I'm not going to say he's Sean Resford, but he could shoot. He's way ahead to me of where somebody like AJ Hoggard was as a freshman.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, he's not gonna threaten Tyson Walker as the best shooter among the guards, or Jade Nakeds. But I look at Jeremy Fears and I'm going to kind of be surprised if he's not at least a low 30s guy from three. I mean, I think he's got that in him now with the potential to get better. Yeah. So yeah, high expectations for him. But again, the great thing is they're not going to be in a position to have to put too much on his plate.
So like I said, Xavier Booker wasn't there, so I can't comment on how he looks and plays. And we'll talk about him later when we go through our preview, when we have a little bit, more.
Yeah, I think generally, just a quick note from other observations that I've seen, and just what I've heard about him at practice, it's kind of what we expected. There's a real learning curve going on with Xavier Booker. I mentioned that Jackson Kohler just gave him the business at a game of Moneyball, for whatever that means. But the word was they were actually competing against each other, which makes sense in that game. So unlike some of these other Moneyball scenarios, they were actually supposedly playing hard. I think defensively is where the adjustment's going to happen. Defensively, and just in general with Xavier, learning and understanding what it means to play hard at a Tom Izzo standard, not at the standard you thought. I've seen interviews this offseason with Jaren Jackson where he talks about that. he's talked a lot this offseason about Michigan State. I've seen him in a couple different scenarios where that's come up. And one of the things he talked about was having to learn what that meant. That he thought he was playing hard, and he discovered he had no idea. So with Xavier, that's but everybody talks about the skill set and combined with his size and not just even the skill set, but also athletically, the way he moves in a body that big is different. And so I'm still convinced we're going to see Xavier Booker make an impact on this team. It's just a question of how much and how quickly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Michigan State is very fortunate Malik Hall's there. So,
yep.
Because I think, initially we thought, well, they'd have to find someone to hold him accountable.
And now,
who's going to play less minutes. Now you have someone who's going to force him. He's going to have to work hard to get minutes, right? And so this is going to be great for situation.
You brought it up. I was going to bring it up at the end, but you brought it up, so I'm bringing it up now. I mentioned that those clips of Michigan State posted yesterday, the Jeremy Fears Jackson Kohler play was one thing that caught my eye. But the thing I was happiest about is in those clips, you see Malik Hall scrimmaging.
Oh, good.
So that is a really great sign that he is back on the floor practicing, and we're still in July. So he's still going to have, assuming all goes well, there's still plenty of time for him. I mean, geez, he's got 6 weeks until school starts. And then, time from there, another month and change between then and when practice starts. Lots of time for Malik to get back and feeling comfortable. So that was really encouraging to see.
So then let's talk about Garrick Norman. I think my impression with him is he is small in the sense that he's thin. He needs to fill out. He kind of looks to me like a little bit like Carson Cooper looked last year, just kind of like a kind of a skinnier guy. But he is a really good shooter. I was impressed.
Yep.
Now, it's Moneyball, so that's always the caveat. But he was defended sometimes, and he looked very smooth, and he looked good. And he can get up, and he dunked once or twice. But he's playing with Cone Carr, so he wasn't expected to do much of the dunking
right
in the game. But he definitely hit a lot of threes and looked good doing it. I was really impressed with his shooting ability, and so this is the what is it, embarrassment of riches or something for Michigan State. It's gonna be a guy as talented as him. Most years you'd see him playing a decent amount, some minutes, right?
Yep.
It's gonna be battle. I mean, right? And the other thing I'd say about him, if all the players I could watch, so the 7 players, or whatever 9, he was playing harder than anyone else. He was playing like the game actually meant something, and so he wasn't taking plays off and stuff. And I don't know if that's just that day, or if that's just, it struck me when we talked to him that's sort of his personality. But,
I think so.
I don't know, but
I think so. I mean, I think we got that when we interviewed him, and you mentioned embarrassment of riches. There are a lot of years where someone like Garrick Norman, last season, put him on last season's team. Would Garrick Norman have played a regular rotation role? Would he have had every chance to earn it? Especially when, Pierre Brooks had the conditioning problems he had. Absolutely, he would have. He's just 1 year late. And I still think it's not decided as to whether I think there's a chance, and I mentioned why. The things that Garrick Norman has 2 things that are really working for him. One is, you mentioned, he's a capable shooter. And I don't think Michigan State is likely to have any shooting problems. But you could see a situation where maybe the way the rotation's working, they feel like they're not getting enough of that there in certain spots with the way the rotation, if you follow me. Just the pattern might be something that would lead you to think, well, we need a little bit more shooting in these minutes. So that would be one thing that maybe Garrett could force his way in. But the other thing is his size. That, whatever he's 6'5", 6'6", he has more size than the guys the 5 guys we already kind of know are going to play. So depending upon certain matchups with given opponents, that might be something that becomes a niche for him because of his physical tools, because of his size. I'm excited about him, though. I think that you look at his, and I don't know whether you got much of a chance to see it, whether he handled the ball much, but he's a good ball handler. He's a good passer. He's a very good athlete, as you kind of alluded to. It gets overshadowed by somebody else in that class, but as almost anybody would be. But Garrett Norman's a good athlete. And he's got a skill set. He can shoot. He's got ball skills. So there's a lot to like. I think with him, the biggest two questions are going to be, one, just how many minutes are truly there, given how MSU's other guys are playing, and then how ready is he to compete defensively? That's what, Moneyball's not going to tell you that. You can't really know until we're in it and we start seeing it and they've gone through practices, and Izzo will evaluate that, how ready he thinks he is. But to me, that's the other thing that has got to be proven with Garrett. But again, very bright future, a lot of reason for optimism around him.
I'm actually glad you mentioned that. I'd forgotten to point that out, that he was played the point probably 30 or 40% of that
there
game,
you go,
where he was bringing the ball up the court and very skilled with the ball. I mean, he was going around the back to get around defenders sometimes when people do the poke steals or whatever, and he had no trouble with that.
The easiest thing in the world to say for a million reasons, but it happens to be true in his case. There's so much Matt McQuaid. And if you remember, Matt McQuaid, his freshman year, actually played, and at different points throughout the rest of his career, actually played some backup point guard for Michigan State. Matt McQuaid was a good ball handler and a good passer, really good. He never had to fully unlock all that stuff because he happened to play with guys like Denzel Valentine and Cassius Winston. That's who his career overlapped with. So they never needed to really ask that much of him. But I think Garrett Norman has the ability to do some of that. It's just going to be a question of how much do they ever need it.
Well, and finally, we'll talk about Konkar, who is, especially with Moneyball, is stealing thunder. I think he was tired by the second half because the first half, it was a dunk show. I mean, he had, 7 or 8 dunks maybe, between the legs, around the back, reverse, off the backboard. He was putting on a show. There was one play that there are times when you wish you had your phone out and you were actually recording, because I wasn't quite sure that I wasn't entirely believing my eyes that what I saw, but he had one where there's a miss on a 3-point off the back iron, and I don't know where he caught that, Rod, but I swear he caught that ball like he high pointed like over the backboard, like as he, and brought it down for two-handed jam. I looked at my son like, did that just happen? He's like, I think so. I mean, it was. Yeah. I don't know. We're seeing up. So the guy is a freak athlete. Will he be able to do all the other things? I don't know. What can he? As far as defensively, will he be in the right position? Can he? I mean, obviously he can block shots because he can certainly jump and get there.
Did you see him?
But
did you see him shoot much? Like from range?
So that was the other thing. He shot a lot of threes, especially in the second half.
Yeah. And
they were pretty terrible. I mean, he had. I think he hit one with kind of like a step back three to tie the game at the very end. So I don't think his shot looked very good. Now, the caveat, of course, being maybe he had a full practice. Yeah. He'd been dunking all the first half, and his legs get tired. I don't know. I wouldn't say the contrast between him and Gehrig, Norm, was pretty stark. Gehrig looked like a shooter, was hitting the threes, and looked like a shooter, and Carr didn't. He could do everything else, on there. But so I don't know. I wouldn't expect a ton from him shooting this year, but things change, and it may just been it's one night. I mean, I don't know.
I'll say this. I saw him play on television a couple times last winter, and the one game I'm thinking of in particular, I saw him go 2 for 3 on threes, and they were actually in the flow of play. They weren't just dribble the ball down and jack it up. And it was good results. Now, it occurs to me, it is possible that when you're talking about a guy at his stage and where we are in the season, and I'm not trying to give him an out. I'm just saying Michigan State, especially with guys who are younger in their career, and if they're not coming in as pure shooters already, like, you probably don't have to do very much with Garrett Norman, for example. Mechanically, he's going to be pretty sound. It's possible that they're working on stuff with Cohen and that they're trying to reconstruct his shot mechanics a little bit, because they will do that with guys. So that's why I hesitate to take too much from a bad performance, because I have to tell you, what I saw in last winter didn't look bad. I'd been led to believe it was a problem. And I watched that game and I thought, well, that's okay. That's a shot mechanically. He should be able to get that off in the Big Ten. It's not too slow. It's not coming. He's not shooting from his waist. Any of the things that you see as problems sometimes. And the results were good too. But I believe you that he struggled. And it could be that he was just feeling the effects of whatever happened earlier that day. That could be a problem too. Or it could be that he really is struggling shooting the ball. All those are possible. I just don't take too much from it yet. Again, to me, the whole thing, though, with him and his role is going to turn on what he does defensively. And he's another guy to put in that perimeter picture too, because, he, again, that's another option. I mean, at least physically, if Cohen Carr is up to speed in terms of his defensive responsibility, and you're playing in Illinois, well, he's a great matchup physically for somebody like Terrence Shannon. I mean, that's the kind of body you want to have available. So keep him in mind there too. And he could also play some 4. We'll just have to see how it evolves. But the defensive end is where it's all going to turn, because if he can guard people, he's going to play regardless of the shooting, because he just gives them that extra gear athletically, as you were mentioning, as everybody realizes by now, that, I this might sound hyperbolic, but right now, the guys I'm aware of that are in college basketball, I can't think of an obviously better athlete from a jump standpoint than Cohen Carr. I mean, he's that. So he gives you that element. I talk sometimes about, especially in NCAA tournament games, you need guys that are able to make those 95th or even 99th percentile plays, where just a guy on your team can go out and do something physically or from a skill perspective that nobody else on that court is capable of doing at a big moment. Examples would be like, I could think of big rebounds in the 2015 Elite Eight game against Louisville, where BJ Dawson just went up and got rebounds that nobody else physically was going to be able to get. He high pointed the ball just higher than everybody else on that court. That's an example. Well, Cohen Carr is a guy who can make certain kinds of 99th percentile plays physically. That is nobody else. As you said, it looked to you like he was above the backboard. He might have been with his hands extending up like that. I've seen clips where it looks to me like his head's getting pretty close to the top of the square. And that's about as high as you're ever going to see any human being get. When their head, forget the rim, at the top of the square.
He did that once in the game. Yeah, he was that high.
Yeah.
He got up that high. And because my son told me, he said, whoa,
yeah.
I can't believe.
It's striking. But again, the whole deal is going to be, can Cohen guard? And I've been optimistic on that front, because all the physical tools are there for him to be a very, very high level defender. But that's not the entirety of it. So we've got to see where he's at, and then that's going to tell the story.
Yep. I think the things with Cohen this season are, there's no expectation that he has to shoot. There's shooters all over the floor. Right. You don't need him to shoot.
Right.
You need him to rebound and you need him to defend, like you said. And then the great thing about this team is it's so deep that if he doesn't defend, he's not going to play.
Right.
And so he's going to be forced to do it. And so, some guys can kind of get away with sort of dogging it at one end of the court. He's not going to have that option because he's just not going to see the floor. Because everybody's capable of playing and contributing in so many different ways in this team that you can't not do the basics that Tom Izzo requires for his players.
You look at it right now, you've got 12 scholarship players, and there is a case for every single one of them being in the rotation. Tom Izzo likes big playing groups. I don't think he's going to play 12 guys regularly. So somebody is going to be out of the mix. Who is that, and how does that function? Or is it inconsistent? Is it not always the same guy that's out of the rotation? A lot of possibilities there, but we'll see. And a lot of it with the young guys is going to come down to how quickly do they pick it up on the defensive end. I think that's true for for everybody in that class except Fears, because I just think Fears, it's a given that he'll do that. But the other three guys, it's tell me how they defend. I can then start to tell you how many minutes they'll probably play.
Yeah, and I'd say if you have an assumption about what minutes are going to be from freshmen this year, outside of Fears, because I think Fears, you're going to get probably double digit. I think.
Oh yeah,
I'd say
with Jeremy, I'm expecting, mid-teens, somewhere in there, 15, 16 minutes a game, something like that.
But I think if you have any sort of thoughts that you know what's going to happen with the other three, I just don't think there's any way to know at this point.
You can't. I think right.
It's just a guess, and so I think
and
a hunch, and it's going to change probably throughout
that's
the
what
year
I was going to say. And where it is in November is not where it's going to be in March with all those guys. Because again, we've seen that. You saw it last year at Michigan State. Look at where Carson Cooper was in November, and then go to him playing meaningful minutes and contributing in an NCAA tournament game against USC. Well, how did that happen? Well, it happened because he progressed throughout the year. And with all three of those guys we're talking about, the thing that gives them a real chance to do that is, ideally, if you have athletic gifts of some sort, that gives you a real chance, because then it's just about the mental part of it catching up. And that absolutely can happen over the course of a few months. You're not saying, well, this guy he's just too weak. He just can't compete physically, and again, I cite Carson Cooper as an example. He had an advantage in that way because athletically, he always had the tools to do it. It was just going to be how quickly did he get things conceptually, the mental side of it down. And once that started to happen, boom, his body was there to be able to take advantage of it.
Absolutely. Well, it'll be fun. We'll go through the previews of the other Big Ten teams. We got a couple more weeks of off-season stuff before we get into the Big Ten previews, and then into the season. It's actually it's not that far away now. As summer, I hate to say it's winding down, but we're getting late in July now, and it's coming. And so I just want to thank you for listening to the show. Make sure you continue sharing with your friends. If you're a new listener, I was at Moneyball. I was leafleting all the cars. I say all the cars. I didn't bring nearly enough. I haven't done that in ages, where put in the windshield wipers. I also was real worried that I was going to set off car alarms, and I didn't set off a single one. So I wasn't sure that was going to happen.
About that. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I thought, oh, this would be a great idea, and then I started doing about 3 or 4 cars. I'm like, I'm going to probably set off a car alarm. I didn't set off a single one, so maybe they're not they don't respond to people grabbing the windshield wipers. And so, if you're a new listener, thanks so much. Hopefully, you enjoy the show.
Hey, yeah, and you know what?
Listening and subscribe.
If you're a quick thought. If you're a new listener and you got to us through that flyer, and you enjoyed listening to this, shoot us an email or send us a comment on Twitter, something. Let us know, because that would be interesting to know if we're reaching people that way.
Yeah, it's always a challenge to try and find ways of expanding and growing the show. A podcast like this, it's grown tremendously for the last year and a half. It's done really great, but we're always looking to try and reach more ears. And whatever you do to share the show obviously helps. but we want to just try and find ways to do that. And, the traditional advertising for podcasts is tricky and trying to figure out how to do that. And, our budget's obviously not $1 million. And so we have to try and find creative ways of getting things out and targeting our audience. And so anyway, yeah, if that's how you found us, that'd be great to know. And next time I'll have to make more copies because there are far more cars in the parking lot than I thought. But I also found I could do it really quick. So anyway, that was the other thing. So again, make sure you visit our sponsors. You can go to support the show, either one-time payments via PayPal or Venmo, or to be a monthly subscriber through Patreon with various benefits. You can go to thefinalfoursontheschedule.com/support. You can also go to our sponsors, Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com, or the Brothers at Just Your Gutters at brothersgutters.com. Their specific emails will be in the description below in your podcast player or on YouTube. But until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green. Thank you.